Hey guys, Mike Sjogren here from SNA Capital. In this new video series that we're putting together, we want to go through some of the fundamentals of commercial real estate investing. And in this first piece, part one, we're going to go over asset valuation. So let's get right into it. So one of the big differences between residential and commercial properties is how they're valued, and it's extremely important that you understand this. So with a residential property, we'll take a look here. Say we have apartment 1 and apartment 2. They're on the same street, same size, same number of units. Everything's the same. So if apartment number 1 recently sold for $650,000, the property next door will most likely sell for $650,000. It's called the market comparables method for valuation. Now with commercial real estate, it's different because we're buying for value. We're buying as an investment. So if these two properties were identical, same number of units, same everything, but one of them produced $50,000 of net operating income, or NOI, a month, and the other one produced $100,000, obviously you'd want to buy the one that's worth $100,000. So they should not be worth the same. So there's a method that we use in commercial real estate, and it's all formula driven. So the value of the purchase price equals the net operating income divided by the capitalization rate. And I'll get into that in a second. But if we use this formula, we can see that apartment number 2, which produces $100,000 a month, or per year, excuse me, net operating income per year, is worth significantly more than apartment number 1, obviously, because it's producing more income, which is more valuable to an investor. Now, just a quick point, net operating income is the amount of income that the property produces minus the operating expenses. So that excludes the mortgage, that excludes any capital improvements, and that excludes any capital reserves. And if you're looking for more information about what those are specifically, feel free to send me a note and I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Now, we can see from this slide that, okay, apartment number 2 produces more than apartment number 1, therefore apartment number 2 is worth more than apartment number 1. Seems like it makes sense. But what happens now if you have two properties that both produce the same amount of income, but one of them is brand new and the other one's 30 years old? Should they still be worth the same? Now, obviously not, because the first apartment that's brand new, it's going to have less risk. You're going to have all the high-end amenities in it. You're going to have a higher socioeconomic tenant base in there, which is less risky. It's easier to collect rents. You're going to have less maintenance than a property that's 30 years old. You know, it's just a lot more work and a lot more risk to manage and own apartment number 2. So the way that we factor that into the valuation is through the formula that we talked about, and it's through the cap rate. So the cap rate, you can think of the cap rate as like a risk factor. So a newer property that's less risky will have a lower cap rate. And all that the cap rate is, if you quantify it, is if you look at this formula, the cap rate is the return that you would get on a property if you paid for it in cash, entirely in cash. So there's no mortgage. We needed a way to measure the value of a property. Some people are going to pay all cash, some are going to take out a mortgage. So we need to exclude that in order to keep a consistent valuation methodology. So for an example, in these two instances, a brand new property versus a 30-year-old property, a cap rate may be 6% for the new building and 9% for the older building. So if we had a net operating income of $100,000 in both instances, the new property would be worth $1.67 million, and the older property would be worth $1.1 million. Again, you can buy the older property for less money and make the same return because you're taking on more risk, is the basic premise. So what should the cap rate be? And in order to understand that, we have to understand that there's 4 asset classes or property classes. So you have your class A, which is your brand spanking new, beautiful, high-end, best amenities, brand new apartment complex. all the way down to your Class D, which is really old, super high vacancy. Typically, you're going to have the drug dealers and all sorts of crime rate. It's basically a property that you don't want to deal with, and we don't deal with. We like to play in the B and C space. Properties that are anywhere from 10 to 20, maybe 30 years old. They have some amenities. There's some maintenance. There's some room to add some value. And you've got a mix of white collar, blue collar, maybe some subsidized housing. And in the Class C type properties, you're going to have to do a little bit more capital work, like replacing roofs and HVAC systems and things like that. So basically, and again, it comes down to risk and reward. So the newer properties have less risk, so you're going to get a lower return. You go all the way to the right, you get a lot of risk, you get a lot of return. So the cap rates reflect that. So in your Class A, right now in the market, you're looking anywhere from 4 to 6%, Class B, 6 to 8%, Class C, 8 to 12, and D, 12 plus. But again, I wouldn't recommend getting into Class D property. So the key points from this presentation were residential properties, which are under 4 units. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. So if it's 4 units or less, it's valued based on comparable sales. If it's 5 units or more, it's considered commercial, and it's valued based on the income that it produces. The net operating income is the annual income minus the annual operating expenses. And again, that doesn't include the mortgage, the reserves, or the capital improvements. The cap rate is a measure of risk, and it calculates the return on an all-cash purchase. There's 4 different asset classes, A through D. A is the lowest risk, lowest return. D is the highest risk, highest return. And the golden formula for the value of a property is its net operating income divided by the cap rate. If you found this helpful, I'd love to hear from you. Keep in touch. This is our website, email, phone, and you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And we will keep you posted with more great information. Thank you.